Hello everybody and welcome to this my first video about my book The Philosophy of the Universe and the Dimensions of the Multiverse. Where do I begin with this? So I guess I began my theory 21 years ago now. I set out to try and learn something about the nature of the universe, the nature of God, and what exactly our spiritual connection is. Fundamentally, what I wanted to do was try and find a modern and scientific way of interpreting God for a modern and scientific world. We have, certainly where I grew up in the city of Leicester, there was a lot of different religious communities around, and at the time in 2000 and 2001 there were a lot of difficulties, especially with certain religious communities, which I don't really want to go into that. Now at that time I was starting to experiment with things like meditation for relaxation and tension and depression that I was going through. And in the process of that, I began to experience a spiritual awakening, which I was not expecting. But it happened, and with that spiritual awakening, the best I can describe it is the voice of your conscience. That thing, that voice in the back of your head that says, hey, that's a good thing, or hey, that's a bad thing. And I began communicating with that part of my consciousness more on purpose, consciously communicating with it rather than it being a force unto itself and telling me when I'm right and wrong. And with that experience came the notion, and this is where I had to take a step back from the whole thing and say, hey, this is actually quite crazy and not healthy, and certainly very egotistical. But the notion that came through was that I am God, or some kind of messiah figure, which is still absurd. Really, whenever I hear people talk about this, I think to myself, man, I hope you get the help you need. I tried to get the help I needed by exploring religion and spirituality to prove that I am God wrong. And all through the experience, what I found is more confirmations that God is in everything. What we call God, or Brahman, or Allah, or the Great Spirit, or the Sun, our universe, the higher power. It's in everything, which includes me and you and everybody else in the world, and all the grass and all the trees and all the leaves, the birds, the monkeys, the animals, my pet dog. It's everything. I recently learned that Carl Sagan had a similar idea of this. He said that life is God experiencing itself, or something along the lines of that. And other philosophers and physicists have also come to similar conclusions, which is something I've been learning more recently as I've been researching more into the physics and science of modern academia today. So there is a bridge to be built there between spirituality and science, and science community is doing their part, and it's seems like it's up to the spiritual community to learn something more about physics and quantum physics in order to bridge that gap. That's kind of where I'm at now with it. But 20 years ago, it was basically, I wanted to set out to try and understand spirituality in a scientific manner. And in 2015, through visions and such, I got a vision of the universe as being one living being. And with that, the dimensions of that being built upon 5 principles. The first is time, the second is light, the third is matter, the periodic table of elements, atoms, really, atoms. The fourth dimension is electromagnetic frequency. At the time it was revealed, the word was gravity. But what I've learned about gravity since then is that it exists within an electromagnetic field. And yeah, so I use electromagnetic fields as the fourth dimension. And then as the fifth dimension is life. All life is 5D. And this 5D life all individually make up their own center of its universe, culminating in a multiverse, billions and trillions of uncountable, infinite lives across this universe that are all experiencing this individual life. That's the way I'm putting it right now because of my nerves and this being my first video trying to explain my theory. As a multiverse, the theory that there are parallel dimensions and these parallel dimensions are somewhere to be grabbed, like in front of us, or we could travel to it using some technology, and when we arrive there we'd realize it's almost exactly the same as our universe, but there's one slight difference. And well, if we consider the grass, they're all almost exactly the same, having a very similar experience, but each one is a slightly different color and therefore absorbs a slightly different amount of sunlight or slightly different frequencies within the white light. And so each individual piece of grass has a very different experience from the one next to it. And the same could be said for human beings in a way. We all share this planet Earth and we're all having an individual experience. But there's got to be one person who's almost having a life exactly like ours. Just one slight difference. We could probably line each human being up in a particular order and find that there's almost no difference between one and the next. But a sharp difference between the two ends, And then we could probably circulate back round. That's just a theory. I'm babbling. So that is the basic crux of my 5D theory, that time is the first dimension. And we might think, well, time doesn't even exist. Where is it? You can't grab it, you can't see it, it's not there. Well, if we truly examine X, Y, and Z axes, then we'll see that it shouldn't be there. A true first dimensional line should not be visible. and it should not be tangible. So let me explain. If time is the first dimension and light is the second dimension, or light is 2D, matter is 3D. So let's go from 3D, the current model that we have now. And I want you to imagine that there is a cube in front of you, a 10 by 10 by 10 cube. And what we're going to do is remove one axis of that cube so that the x-axis in its cubic form is completely gone, and all that we are remained with is two axes of a square. Absolutely zero z-axis. So you take this cube and you start cutting it away. Let's say we cut it in half first, and now we've got a 10 by 10 square that's 5 deep. And we decide we're going to keep cutting away, so we keep cutting away until we get this very, very, very thin piece of that shows us a square, a 2D square. But it's still very thin, and that's still a z-axis. Unfortunately, we still have to keep cutting away. And what we find when we finally removed all of the z-axis, that there is nothing left of our cube. What have we done with our square? Well, what we learn is that no 2D object or no 2D substance can have any kind of physical form. This leaves us with a table empty, and we want a 10 by 10 square on it. The only option we have in our universe is to use light. So we cast a light onto the table. 10 by 10. There it is. We want to start removing a y-axis now, so that we have a line that is 10 and 0 y-axis. So we'll proceed how we did with the cube. We'll cut it in half. We'll cut the y-axis down from 10 to 5. And now we have a 10 by 5 rectangle. Still have some y-axis left. So let's keep removing it. As the light, we could say we use something to block the light that's being cast onto it. We draw a shadow down, 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 right close as we can to 0. And what we find is we have this very thin line of light on the table. Unfortunately, we still have some y-axis left. Y is not 0 yet. We take y to absolute 0, and theoretically what happens is there is no more light cast on the table. We've completely removed the y-axis, and we've completely removed all substance and all light. All we have left is an invisible line that tracks from one direction to the other.